The night was silent until the sky broke open with fire. Metal streaks fell from the heavens, burning brighter than stars, and the ground shook as explosions echoed across the valley. Families hid in their homes, terrified of the sudden attack that came without warning. Soldiers ran through the streets, shouting orders, their voices drowned by the roar of falling ships and weapons that lit up the horizon like a second sun. Mira held her daughter close, covering her ears as the blasts grew louder. The little girl asked what was happening, but Mira had no answers. She had seen wars before, but this was different. The machines in the sky were not from Earth. They moved like predators, fast and merciless, hunting anything that moved below. Mira prayed for someone to stop them, but deep inside she feared no one could. At the edge of the city, an army of humans rose to fight back. Their weapons were old compared to the invaders, but their spirits burned fierce. They had seen too much to surrender. Among them was a man whose face carried both strength and sorrow. His name was Daniel, a soldier who had already given 30 years of his life to battles across worlds. He thought he had nothing left to lose, until he saw what the enemy did to his home. The battle raged for hours, turning streets into rivers of fire. Daniel fought like a man who carried the weight of many lives, his blade cutting through armored beasts, his eyes burning with fury. Yet even he knew they could not win like this. For every ship they destroyed, 10 more appeared in the sky. For every soldier that stood, 5 more fell beside him. Still, Daniel pressed forward, refusing to bow, refusing to stop. Then came the blast that changed everything. A beam of light, brighter than anything seen before, struck the heart of the city. Buildings shattered, the ground split, and the air itself seemed to tear apart. Daniel was caught in the center of it, his body lifted into the burning sky. For one moment he felt nothing but pain, then silence. When the light faded, he was gone, his name whispered as another sacrifice in a war too cruel to count. Mira collapsed when she heard the news. Her husband was gone, the father of her child taken by the war. For days she sat in silence, staring at the horizon where the city still smoked, unable to answer her daughter's questions. The little girl asked if he would ever come back. Mira whispered no. She believed death was the only end, and Daniel's story had closed in fire. She held on to his memory, broken but still proud. Years passed. The invaders left scars across the land but were finally pushed back. Earth survived, though. It was never the same again. Children grew up hearing stories of the ones who had fallen. Daniel's name became one of those stories, a tale of courage spoken in quiet voices. His daughter grew up knowing her father only through words and faded pictures. Mira aged with sorrow etched into her face, her eyes carrying both love and pain whenever she remembered him. Then one cold morning, something impossible happened. A figure appeared at the edge of the ruins, walking with slow, steady steps. His armor was scorched but still strong, his blade at his side. His hair was dark, his face unlined, his eyes young and sharp. He looked no older than 20. Mira's daughter saw him first and ran to her mother, pointing with wide eyes. The girl whispered with fear and wonder, asking a question that froze Mira's heart. "Who's that boy, Mom?" Mira turned to look and felt the blood drain from her face. She knew that walk. She knew those eyes. It was Daniel. But something had gone wrong. He had come back 50 years younger. Daniel stood in the ruins, his eyes scanning the broken city around him. The cold wind carried dust through the empty streets, and silence pressed in from every side. He felt stronger than ever, yet something was wrong. His hands were steady, his body young, but his memory screamed of years he could no longer see. Mira could not believe what she was seeing. The boy standing before her wore the armor of her husband, the same blade, the same stance. But his face was far too young, untouched by the decades of battles he had endured. Her heart ached as her daughter pulled at her hand, whispering again that strange question. "Who's that boy, Mom?" Mira's lips trembled as she gave the only answer she could. "It is your father." Daniel stepped forward, confusion in his eyes as he saw Mira. His memories told him she was his wife, the woman he had sworn to protect. But his heart did not understand the lines of age on her face. He remembered her as young, strong, and radiant. Now she looked at him with eyes full of tears. And behind her stood a girl who could only be his daughter, though he remembered her as a baby. Time had betrayed him, yet he had returned unchanged. The soldiers who remained gathered around in disbelief. They knew Daniel had died in the blast. They had buried his name in sorrow and carried his story as legend. Now he stood before them, alive, looking no older than a recruit. Some whispered that it was a trick, others called it a miracle. None could explain what had happened. Yet in their hearts, a spark of hope returned. If Daniel could rise from the fire, perhaps Earth's future was not lost. Mira reached out, her hand trembling as it touched his face. The warmth of his skin was real, not a dream, not a ghost. She wanted to embrace him, but a storm of confusion held her still. Her husband was younger than her now, younger than even she had been when they first met. The years she had endured alone weighed heavy, and her eyes filled with both joy and sorrow. She whispered his name, and Daniel answered. With a voice unchanged by time, the little girl stepped forward, her eyes wide with wonder. She had grown up with stories of her father, tales of bravery told by her mother and old soldiers. But to see him now, alive and so young, filled her with disbelief. She asked again if this was truly her father. Daniel bent down, his hand resting on her shoulder, and he whispered that he was. The girl looked at him with awe, her heart torn between excitement and fear. How could her father be younger than her mother? Questions spread quickly through the survivors. What force had brought Daniel back? Why had he returned in the body of a young man when 50 years had passed for the rest of them? Some feared it was alien technology, a trap meant to confuse and weaken them. Others believed it was destiny, a gift from the universe to guide humanity once more. Daniel himself had no answers. He only remembered the light, the pain, and then waking in the ruins. Night fell, and the fires of the city glowed under the broken sky. Daniel sat with Mira and his daughter, the silence between them heavy. He wanted to speak of love, of reunion, but the weight of time stood like a wall. He was young, she was old, and their child had grown without him. The war had taken everything, and even in his return, it had twisted their lives in ways no one could undo. Mira's heart fought between happiness and sorrow as she looked at the boy who was once her husband. Far away, hidden beyond the stars, the enemy watched. The same blast that had torn the city and stolen Daniel had been their weapon, yet its result was not what they intended. They had tried to erase him, to break the spirit of humanity. Instead, something strange had happened. The human had returned, changed by forces even they did not understand. Now whispers spread among them that perhaps the war had awakened something more dangerous than their weapons. The boy who should have died now walked again, and the galaxy would soon learn what that meant. The next morning the camp buzzed with tension. Survivors whispered about Daniel, some afraid and some inspired. Children followed him at a distance, their eyes wide with wonder at the young man who carried himself like a seasoned warrior. Soldiers studied his armor, noting the scars of battles they could not remember. Every movement he made reminded them of the hero they had lost, yet his face betrayed the mystery of time itself. Mira stayed close, though her heart battled every moment. She could not reconcile the boy she saw with the man she had once loved. His smile was unchanged, his voice the same, but she felt as if she stood beside a ghost of her past. The years she had endured without him pressed heavy on her chest. She wanted to embrace him as her husband, but when she looked into his young eyes, she felt the distance of decades between them. Daniel sensed her struggle, though no words were spoken. He remembered their love as if only days had passed. He remembered holding her hand, promising to return, and he remembered the fire that had swallowed him whole. Yet now he stood before her, strong and young, while time had left its mark upon her. His heart reached for her, but his mind struggled to understand the cruel gift he had been given. To return alive yet unchanged while everything else had moved forward was a wound deeper than any battle scar. The little girl stayed quiet at first, watching her father from behind her mother's arm. Then slowly she approached, clutching a small wooden toy she had carved. She held it out to him, her voice shaking as she said she made it for the father she thought was gone. Daniel knelt down, his hand trembling as he accepted it. For a moment the war, the years, and the questions faded. In that moment only father and daughter remained, bound by love that no time or mystery could erase. But the world outside their fragile camp had not grown kinder. Scouts returned with news that the enemy ships were gathering again. The invaders had not been defeated, only delayed. Their machines darkened the skies far beyond the horizon, and whispers said they were searching for something. Some believed they were hunting Daniel. Others feared they wanted to finish what they had started when the blast struck him down. Either way, humanity had little time before the next storm. The Council of Survivors called Daniel into their meeting. They demanded answers he could not give. How had he returned? Why was he young while his wife had grown old? Could the same power that restored him be used to save others? Daniel could only shake his head. He knew nothing beyond the blast and the moment he awoke in the ruins. His silence frustrated them, but still they looked at him with hope. To them, he was more than a man. He was a sign that humanity still had a chance. That night, Daniel walked alone through the broken streets of the city. His boots crunched over shattered stone as he stared at the stars above. He remembered the battles of his past, the friends he had lost, the promises he had made. He wondered if fate had spared him for a reason or cursed him with a burden no man should carry. The sky felt heavy, and in its silence he thought he heard the whispers of enemies beyond the stars watching him. Mira found him standing among the ruins, her cloak wrapped tight against the cold. She asked him what he would do now. Daniel turned to her, his young face shadowed by sorrow. He told her he could not ignore the war. He was a soldier, and as long as the enemy threatened Earth, he would fight. His words were strong, but she saw the doubt behind them. He was a man out of time, torn between the past he remembered and the future he did not belong to. As the night deepened, Mira's daughter clung to her father's side. She whispered that she did not want him to leave again. Daniel promised her that he would always return, no matter the danger. The words came easy, but his heart burned with fear that the promise could not be kept. The blast had taken him once. The war might claim him again. Yet as he held her close, he felt a fire within him rise. If fate had returned him to this world, then he would carve a path forward no enemy could erase. The following day began with a strange silence. The survivors worked to rebuild their shelters, but their eyes always drifted to Daniel. His return had stirred both hope and unease. Some saw him as a gift, others whispered he was a warning. No one knew what the blast had truly done to him, and even Daniel himself carried doubts too heavy for words. Mira watched him from a distance as he trained with the soldiers. His movements were sharp, precise, and filled with strength that did not match his youthful frame. He fought like a man with decades of scars, yet he looked no older than her daughter's classmates. The contrast twisted her heart. She loved him, yet she struggled to see him as the husband she had buried. His face was too young, and it reminded her of a time long gone. The little girl, however, saw only her father. She followed him everywhere, asking questions about battles, heroes, and promises. Daniel answered with patience, though he felt a pang each time she smiled. He had missed her growing years, and no power could return those lost days. She wanted to know what had happened to him, why he had come back so young. He simply told her that he had fought for her and that somehow, the war had given him another chance. One evening, Daniel stood before the council again. Maps were spread across the table, showing enemy movements around the world. The invaders were gathering forces, and their ships circled the skies like predators waiting to strike. The leaders asked Daniel what strategy should be taken. He studied the maps with calm eyes, his experience guiding his words. Though his face was young, his wisdom carried the weight of wars fought across galaxies. His voice reminded them why he had once been called a hero. He spoke of courage, of refusing to surrender even when the odds burned against them. He reminded them that humans had always survived by standing together. His plan was not simple, but it was clear. Strike before the enemy was ready, target their supply lines, and use the ruins as cover. The council hesitated, yet the fire in his voice stirred something in them. They saw the soldier they had lost and the leader they desperately needed. In the end, they agreed to follow him. That night, Mira confronted him by the fireside. She asked if he was certain of his plan or if he was rushing toward death again. Daniel looked into her aged eyes, seeing the love and the pain that lived there. He told her he could not ignore the fight. If the blast had spared him, then it was for this purpose. He believed his return was no accident. She shook her head, torn between admiration and fear. To her, he was still her husband, but he was also something more, something she did not yet understand. The soldiers began to prepare under Daniel's command. Weapons were sharpened, defenses built, and training carried out late into the night. For the first time in years, there was order and direction. Daniel walked among them, his presence lifting spirits. They spoke his name in whispers like a prayer, believing he could guide them through the storm ahead. Yet even as hope grew, shadows moved across the sky. The enemy was watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. Mira's daughter clung to her father's side, watching as he trained men twice his age. She felt both pride and fear. She asked if he would leave again. He promised he would fight, but he would not vanish as he had before. She wanted to believe him, yet her young heart trembled. She had lived her whole life with stories of his sacrifice. Now she feared the stories might repeat themselves, ending in silence and loss. Far above, in the cold void of space, the enemy studied the humans' movements. Their leaders argued over what had gone wrong with their weapon. The blast should have erased Daniel from existence. Instead, he had returned, younger and stronger. Some feared that the weapon had awakened something ancient within him. Others warned that humanity would rally around this figure. In the end, they agreed on one thing: Daniel was no longer just a soldier. He was a threat to their entire campaign, and he would have to be destroyed. The morning of battle arrived heavy with tension. Soldiers gathered around Daniel, their eyes fixed on the young man who had returned from death. He spoke to them with calm strength, his words steady and firm. He reminded them that fear was natural, but courage was their choice. The men and women listened as if every word carried the weight of survival. For the first time in years, they felt united beneath one voice. Mira stood apart, watching the man she once called her husband lead warriors into a fight that might be their last. Her heart pulled in two directions. She was proud to see him alive, strong and inspiring others. Yet the thought of losing him again filled her with dread. She had buried him once, and she did not believe her heart could endure it a second time. She whispered his name under her breath, as if her voice could protect him from fate. Daniel walked among the fighters, checking their weapons and steadying their nerves. Each time he met their eyes, he gave them a nod of confidence. He remembered the fear of first battles, the trembling hands, the desperate need for assurance. Though his body was young, his mind carried the lessons of countless wars. He spoke not like a boy but like a general forged in fire, To those around him, he was more than human. He was a symbol of what humanity could endure. The little girl followed him until Mira pulled her back. She cried that she did not want him to leave. Daniel knelt before her, his hand brushing her cheek. He promised that he would fight not just for Earth, but for her future. He told her that every step he took was for her smile. She nodded, holding back tears, but her small heart ached with fear. He stood, kissed her forehead, and placed his blade at his side. Then he walked toward the soldiers, the weight of 2 worlds on his shoulders. The attack began at dawn. Enemy ships broke through the clouds, their metal frames glowing with deadly energy. The sky burned with fire as weapons clashed, and the earth shook with every strike. Daniel led the charge, his voice rising above the chaos. He moved with impossible speed, his strikes precise, his eyes clear. Soldiers followed him without hesitation, their courage fueled by the sight of him fighting like a storm among giants. The enemy was stronger, their weapons advanced, yet Daniel's leadership turned fear into fury. Human fighters struck harder than before, their attacks coordinated, their movements guided by his commands. The ruins became traps, the shadows their shield, and the fire of defiance burned in their hearts. For every machine that fell, cheers rose, echoing across the battlefield. Daniel's presence transformed despair into hope, and hope became a weapon sharper than steel, but victory was not certain. The enemy adapted quickly, their machines pressing harder, their ships circling like vultures. Explosions tore through the streets, scattering rubble and flame. Soldiers fell, cries of pain mixing with the roar of war. Daniel fought harder, his young body carrying the strength of ages, yet even he knew the danger was overwhelming. The blast that had once taken him returned to his memory, a reminder that fate could strike again without warning. Mira and her daughter watched from a distance, sheltering with the other survivors. Every time she saw his figure in the smoke, Mira's chest tightened. He was her husband, yet not the same. He was her past reborn as something new, something strange. She wanted to scream for him to return, but her voice was lost in the thunder of war. Her daughter clutched her arm, whispering that he would not fall. Mira closed her eyes, praying that the child's faith would hold true. High above, enemy commanders studied the battle with unease. Their weapon had failed once, and now it seemed their entire campaign trembled because of one human. He fought with the power of many, his presence bending the will of others. They realized that killing him would not simply be victory. It would be survival for their own kind. Orders were given. Every ship, every machine was commanded to focus on Daniel. The storm of war would close around him, and the fate of humanity would rest on whether he could endure it. The battlefield shook under the enemy's focused assault. Every machine turned its weapons toward Daniel, firing beams that scorched the ground and shattered stone. Soldiers shouted warnings, but Daniel moved like a shadow through the fire. His blade cut down armored foes, sparks flying as metal collapsed. Yet with each step, the danger grew heavier, and it was clear the enemy would not stop until he was gone. The humans fought desperately to protect him. Shields were raised, guns roared, and courage burned brighter than fear. But the enemy pressed harder, their numbers endless, their weapons relentless. Daniel shouted commands, his voice carrying through the chaos, guiding his people into positions that saved lives. Still, he felt the noose tightening. The invaders had marked him as the center of the storm, and nothing else mattered to them. Now Mira watched from the ruins, clutching her daughter close. Her eyes searched for Daniel's figure in the smoke, her heart racing each time she lost sight of him. She wanted to run to him, to shield him, though she knew she could not. Her daughter whispered that he would not fall, her young voice trembling with faith. Mira forced herself to believe, though fear gnawed at her soul. She had lost him once, and she could not bear to lose him again. The battle reached a breaking Point when the enemy unleashed a weapon larger than any seen before. A tower of fire shot from the skies, tearing into the earth like the hand of a god. The ground split open, soldiers were thrown into the air, and silence fell for a breath before the sound returned in thunder. Daniel stood in the center of the blast, his young body glowing in the light, unbroken where others had fallen. Gasps rose from both sides. Humans saw hope. Aliens felt dread. The weapon had been meant to erase him as before, yet once again, he stood alive. His armor glowed, his skin shimmered with strange energy, and his eyes burned with a light that was not natural. He raised his blade, and the fire of the blast bent around him, twisting as if the universe itself refused to harm him. Soldiers who saw this cried his name with renewed strength. The enemy commanders panicked. Reports spread through their fleet that the human was not just surviving but changing. Their greatest weapon had failed twice, and fear spread even among their most loyal ranks. Some whispered that he was no longer only a man but something their science could not explain. They feared he was the answer to a prophecy long buried in their history, a warning that humanity would rise with a force that could break empires. Daniel felt the power surge within him, though he did not understand it. His heart raced, his muscles burned, but he moved faster and struck harder than ever before. He cut through the machines with ease, his every step leaving fire in its wake. He was young in body, old in mind, and now something more in spirit. The blast that had once taken him had changed him forever. He was no longer simply a soldier of Earth. He was something the galaxy had never seen, but with power came fear. Mira saw the glow in his eyes when he returned from the fire. She saw the way the air bent around him, the way enemies fell before he even struck. She wanted to run into his arms, but she hesitated. He was her husband, yet he was also a stranger now. She asked herself if love could survive when the man she knew was becoming something beyond human. The battle ended with the enemy retreating, their ships pulling back into the skies. Humans cheered, their voices rising into the smoke-filled air. For the first time, victory tasted real. Yet Daniel did not smile. He stood in silence, his blade still glowing, his eyes fixed on the stars above. He knew the enemy would return, stronger and more desperate than ever. And deep inside he wondered, not if he could defeat them, but if he could remain himself in the face of the power now burning within him. The battlefield lay quiet after the retreat. Smoke drifted across the ruins, carrying the smell of fire and metal. Soldiers gathered around Daniel, staring at him with awe. None dared speak at first, for what they had seen defied reason. He had stood in the center of a weapon that should have ended all life. Yet he had emerged untouched, glowing with power that felt older than the stars themselves. Daniel lowered his blade, his chest rising with steady breaths. The glow around him dimmed, though not completely. He looked at the faces of his people, their eyes filled with both hope and fear. He wanted to tell them he was the same man they remembered, but the silence pressed on him. Deep inside, he knew something had changed. He was no longer only Daniel the soldier. He was something different, though he could not name it. Mira approached. Slowly, her daughter clinging to her hand. She studied his face, searching for the man she had once loved. His smile was still there, his voice still familiar, yet the light in his eyes unsettled her. She asked him softly if he was still her husband. Daniel reached out, brushing her cheek, and swore he was. But as her skin touched his hand, a faint spark leapt between them, and Mira flinched. She tried to hide her fear, but he had already seen it. The little girl broke the silence with innocent faith. She told him she believed he was her father, no matter what had happened. Her words steadied him, even as uncertainty burned within his chest. He lifted her into his arms, holding her close. The warmth of her embrace reminded him of what he was fighting for. No power, no strange gift, no war could erase the bond between him and his child. That truth anchored him when everything else felt uncertain. The council met in secret, their voices tense as they debated what Daniel had become. Some called him a miracle, chosen to save humanity. Others feared he was cursed, that the enemy's weapon had twisted him into something dangerous. They argued late into the night, their words echoing off the stone walls. In the end, they reached no decision. All they knew was that Daniel's presence would shape the future, for better or worse. Far above, the enemy fleet burned with fear. Commanders shouted at their scientists, demanding answers. The weapon they had unleashed twice had not destroyed him, but changed him. Whispers spread through their ranks of an old legend, a prophecy long buried in their archives. It spoke of a human who would rise from fire, carrying the strength of ages and the wrath of worlds. Some laughed at the tale, others trembled. But all agreed that Daniel's survival was no accident. Daniel himself felt the burden growing heavier each day. He could feel energy within him, restless and unyielding. At night, his dreams burned with visions of fire and stars breaking apart. He would wake with his hands glowing faintly, his breath quick and heavy. He told no one, not even Mira, for he feared what the truth might mean. He clung to the belief that he was still human, though the universe seemed to whisper otherwise. Mira lay awake beside her daughter, watching the firelight flicker on the walls. She thought of the boy she now called her husband, and of the man she had lost. Could both be the same? Could she still love him when he was no longer bound by the same time, the same life as her? She closed her eyes, trying to hold on to the memory of his touch before the glow had begun. Yet she knew the path ahead would test not only his strength, but her heart. The stars above waited in silence, but they would not wait forever. The enemy prepared for their next move. Earth gathered its courage, and Daniel stood between them, both shield and sword. The world whispered his name as hope. The enemy cursed his name as threat. But in the quiet of his heart, Daniel wondered if he was becoming something neither side truly understood. The answer would soon come, for the war was far from over, and his true test had only just begun. The enemy fleet darkened the sky one final time. Thousands of ships formed a wall of fire above the earth, their weapons glowing with deadly light. The air trembled as alarms rang, and the survivors gathered, with dread in their hearts. Humanity had fought with courage, but this was a storm too great to withstand alone. All eyes turned to Daniel, the boy returned from death, the man who now carried power none could understand. He stood at the front lines, his blade at his side, his armor scarred but unbroken. His body glowed faintly, the strange energy inside him stirring as if it sensed the threat. Soldiers waited for his command, their faith resting on his shoulders. Mira and her daughter watched from the ruins, their hearts pulled between fear and pride. They knew this battle would decide everything. Victory or extinction would be written in the fire of the coming hours. The enemy struck without mercy. Beams of energy split the sky, tearing the ground and shattering stone. Cities crumbled, and screams filled the air. Daniel raised his blade, and the glow within him erupted into a storm of light. He leapt forward, moving faster than the eye could follow. Where his blade struck, ships fell, their engines bursting into flame. Soldiers followed, their courage ignited by his impossible strength. Humanity rose like a wave against the tide of death, but the enemy adapted quickly. They focused all fire on Daniel, beams converging with the force of suns. He staggered under the storm, his body burning with power he barely controlled. The ground cracked beneath his feet as he held back, the energy with sheer will. Soldiers cried out his name, fearing he would fall, but he stood firm. His voice roared above the chaos, telling them to fight, to hold, to believe. His words carried through the fire like thunder. Mira saw the glow consume him, his young body blazing brighter than any star. She realized with horror and awe that the power was no gift, it was a burden tearing him apart. She screamed his name, her voice lost in the roar of battle. Their daughter clung to her, tears running down her face, begging for her father not to leave again. Mira held her close, whispering that love would reach him even in the fire. Daniel raised his blade high, the energy around him swirling into a storm that split the sky. He felt the weight of two lives pressing on him, the man who had died, the boy who had returned. He understood now that he had not been brought back to live for himself. He had been brought back to give humanity one final chance. His voice rang out across the battlefield, promising his people they would not fall. His last words carried the strength of every sacrifice ever made. Light erupted from him, blinding and pure. The enemy fleet shattered as if struck by the hand of creation. Ships fell in flames, machines crumbled, and the sky cleared as the storm consumed all that threatened Earth. Silence followed, broken only by the cries of victory from soldiers who could not believe what they had seen. The invaders were gone, defeated not by numbers, not by weapons, but by the unyielding will of one man who refused to bow. When the light faded, Daniel stood in the ruins, his blade broken at his feet. The glow was gone, his strength spent. He turned toward Mira and his daughter, his smile faint but true. He walked to them, his steps heavy yet steady. He embraced them both, whispering that he had kept his promise. Then his body stilled, the spark within him finally fading. He collapsed in Mira's arms, not as a boy of power, but as the man she had always loved. Tears fell, but they were not only of sorrow. Humanity had survived, and Daniel's name would be carried for generations. He had been taken by war, returned by fire, and had given everything to ensure Earth's future. Mira held him close, her daughter beside her, both knowing his sacrifice was not the end. His spirit lived in every life saved, in every child who would grow under free skies. The war was over, and Daniel's story had become legend.